I'm going to go ahead and ask our panelists to tell us what they would like us to know about them and the indigenous nations to which they belong to. So I'll go ahead and start this question off, this introduction part off with Garrick.
Sounds good. Okay. So kia ora. My name is Garrick Cooper. I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. My tribal affiliations are with Ngāti Whanaunga, which is in a region near the main capital, Auckland, and Tauranga Moana, Te Pirirako, which is sort of in a beautiful bay in the Bay of Plenty in New Zealand. I'm a father of 6 children, 2 grandchildren, and no doubt in the future I'll be blessed with more. So, kia ora.
All right, thank you, Garrick. Shaquana, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Shaquana Sebastian. I am the chairwoman of the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. I also work for a tribal councilor, Secretary Pearson. I am an events coordinator and also assistant, so whatever you may need. I've served on youth council for 3 years, so this will be my last year, but I will be moving to advisor, so I won't be going too far. Yeah, that's pretty much. I've always been active in my community since I was like very young, so this is kind of like my life, really, like and outside and home everywhere. So thank you for having me.
And we love to work with you, Shaquana, so thank you so much for not only being at this panel, but for also working with NACP. Smokey,
guys.
Smokey, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Smokey Sumac. Hopefully you can all hear me well. I am a member of the Ktunaxa Nation, located in what I say we currently call British Columbia. So I'm in the Northern Rocky Mountains. For if you know America, if you know US and Canada, we are just around the corner where Idaho, that little sliver of Idaho, I'm just above there. So if you know that part, that helps you know where I am. So, and I am two-spirit. I am trans masculine, use he, him pronouns, and I am a poet as well. So shameless self-promotion. I have a book out with Kaganauts Press called You Are Enough, Love Poems for the End of the World. And I'll put my website in here so you can find stuff on there if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you for linking that, Smokey. Jamie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm from Australia. My name's Jamie. I come from the middle of Australia, so I belong to Aranda and Warlpiri tribes. Aranda is the central part of Australia, and then Warlpiri's northwest from Alice Springs, which is the main town. So yeah, grew up, between, a remote community and a town. Seen 2 worlds, have a lot of experience within museums and repatriation and rebuilding community. And yeah, just honored to be here today and to, listen to everyone's stories and thoughts.
Thank you, Jamie. And then last but not least, we'll have Azucena.
Azucena Misuti. Greetings. Good evening. My name is Azucena. I'm joining you all from the lands of the Podangs and Huangdags. I am Quechua Warmi, Quechua woman from Central Andes of Peru with Chanca and Wadi lineage. My ancestral lands and community are located in between Ayacucho and Hualcahuilca. I am first generation in my family that my indigenous language was not my primary language. And I'm working to change that and regain my indigenous language. My grandparents were forced to relocate from their ancestral lands in the Andes to the coast of Peru due to lack of opportunities in their ancestral lands during the migration wave in the 30s and 40s. And then my parents were pressured to relocate all due to the social political climate in Lima in the 90s. And due to these relocations, I'm a displaced indigenous migrant woman living within the imposed colonial borders of Abiyala, present day colonialist name Americas. And though I am thousands of miles away from my ancestral lands, I do feel welcome when I'm in the company of other Indigenous peoples with similar histories of forced relocation, forced assimilation, and resistance to these continued oppressions of colonization.
Thank you, Azucena, and thank you for everyone for sharing a little bit about themselves. So we'll go ahead and start with our first question. This question has a couple layers, so feel free to answer what you want or expand on certain parts. You don't have to answer every part of it. So how would you diagnose the political health of Indigenous people or describe the status of Indigenous rights in the country where you live and work? What do you see as the most urgent political issues that your community faces? And then finally, is there any agreement/disagreement in your community about what is most pressing and how to respond to it? And we'll go ahead and start off with Azucena.
Background. So in 2007, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted by many countries, but 4 of them opposed it, including the US, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. So it wasn't until 2010 under the Obama administration that the US actually adopted the UN Declaration. So presently, there's 4.5 million Native Americans and Alaska Natives that comprise the 1.5% of the US population. So there are 573 federally recognized Native American nations in the US and over 500 non-federally recognized. So from 1778 and until 1871, the US signed over 500 treaties with Native nations, which those treaties have never been honored and respected, so they're broken treaties. And due to the history of colonization, genocidal acts, and racist policies that have been enacted on Indigenous peoples, so there's present continued violations. So there's, again, land recognition, resources, representation of Native peoples, and here in New England, I would say the legacy of Indian, not just in New England, but the legacy of residential schools all over Turtle Island. And these violations are still present in New England. And this is where I presently live and work. And I've learned this, by going to attending events and trying to reconnect, have a connection with my Indigenous culture by learning the historical legacy of Indigenous peoples here. So I've learned that it takes about 30 years for Native American nations to be federally and state recognized in order for them to receive federal resources and services by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And then they must demonstrate that they existed for many years. Such nations that unfortunately have undergone this is the Eastern Pequot Nation, Golden Hill Pagussit Indian Tribe, Nipmuc Nation have been denied federal and state recognition, have been denied that. And I believe in 2015, Bureau of Indian Affairs also did not allow or applied a rule that did not have nations, could not reapply because they were denied recognition. So we've seen these violations happen time and time again, such as just recent, the Mashpee Wampum tribe, they were under threat to be destabilized, right, by the BIA again during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. The same with other Indigenous nations, like there's the, in Massachusetts, there's Indigenous Burial Grounds, and I believe it's I may be mispronouncing it, but it's Mahanoak Intertribal Committee. So I know that they've been trying to have and have the city of Boston recognize these burial grounds. So again, there's this continuous fight for their sovereignty and their existence. And in my Indian community, there's similar ongoing struggles with lack of acknowledgement, again, communal territories, land theft, violation of prior consultation for mining, fracking, hydroelectrical projects. I have so much included here. I don't think I'm going to get through all of it, but my Indigenous peoples, at least in Peru, are using the agreements. There's one agreement, 169 agreement from the International Labor Organization to defend Indigenous rights and nations. And unfortunately in Peru, previous consultation is not up to par with the international standards of this agreement. and they're not implemented adequately. So these consultations, there's consultations over regulations, but never about laws. So we have these multinational corporations enter our communities, bribe our officials, and indigenous communities and organizations have been demanding that this agreement be recognized. Unfortunately, we haven't had the support of the International Labor Organization or the UN either. So those are the types of currently that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Asusana. Thanks for laying down the groundwork for U.S. colonialism too. Building off that, Shaquana, do you want to add to that, since you also have like a New England perspective on this as well?
Yeah. So hold up. I just want to like read the question over. So I have the, so I think I could speak more of the status of Indigenous rights in the country where I live and work. So in America, of course. I just think it's every day. It's pretty much like a fight to still be recognized, even though even if like say my tribe we're federally recognized, but we still fight to have stuff that should just be like given as part of the deal or whatever came with sovereignty, like a sovereign nation. But we still have to fight. Just like this year, they almost didn't even give any funds for Native Americans for COVID, like at all. They literally, like, we're just like one of the most forgotten like people like in America, where this is like where we originated from, like this is our land. So that's definitely like one big thing. And especially in my tribe, like that we always cover topics on sovereignty. That's the most big thing, because you can do stuff like you want to be able to, you know, exercise your rights and your freedom from your sovereignty, and then the government will come and say that you can't do it. And so we just run into a lot of problems like that, which is, it's sad and it's kind of a lot, because like, you know, like you're capable of doing so much, but they just try to stop you and, you know, like try to control you. So I would say that's the biggest thing in our community. And we always have like conversations, and especially like in our tribal meetings and everything, like just bringing up sovereignty. It's definitely like a sensitive topic, because you don't want to go too far into it, because then you could just talk about it for like hours and hours. But I would definitely say that we're definitely underlooked, overlooked, or however you say it. And we're definitely forgotten about Native Americans and well, Indigenous people in America. They seem to just not really include us in anything unless we have to stand up and start like a march, or like, I don't know, just get their attention. So that's yeah, we're just definitely overlooked. So it, and also I know it depends on like Obama, he did a lot paying attention to Native Americans in America and all that, and then Trump totally you know didn't. And he also made a comment on our about our tribe too, saying that we don't look Native, but like if you know the history, then you would know why the way that we are and the way that we look. But that is, you know, all that. So definitely face a lot going on, but we're definitely the most forgotten in America, when we are the ones who found this land. Well, this is our land, so.
Yeah, I think especially with the elections, how Native people were listed as something else was pretty telling how our country feels about its Indigenous population. But Smokey, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah. I guess whenever I think about the U.S., I'm always like, well, we're happy to have a higher population, so that makes a difference. So when I think about diagnosing political health, that makes a difference. And it makes a difference in our cities. So somewhere like Winnipeg has like 25% of Indigenous people in the city. And so that's going to make a difference to how that is, you know, how we're recognized in those kind of things. However, what I would say our biggest problem is, and I mean, I think it's so hard to do this because coming from an Indigenous perspective of holistic knowledge, racism is like the core, right? And so despite 7 years of Truth and Reconciliation, despite the missing and murdered Indigenous women inquiry, that was another, I think, 5 or 6 years, despite the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People, which came out in 1990, we have many, many government reports that explain what have happened. And still we have, just a couple months ago, Joyce Echequan was a woman who was killed by her nurses. She was in the hospital. She was telling them she was allergic to morphine. She was over medicated, and she Facebook lived her death. And so while they were saying racist things to her, and neither of those, they've both been fired, but neither of them have been charged. So when we look at police violence and Black Lives Matter movements in Canada, people tend to say, well, that doesn't happen here, it's just in the US. And we can all say, no, it happens here. And I think one of the things that we struggle with is friendly and nice, polite Canadian society. And so I teach first year Indigenous studies at a college level, and my students come in and I will have students that say, well, I know what the government did to Indigenous people. So I don't need to know that, I just want to know about your culture. And I go, well, what do you know? Like, well, I know all about residential schools. And I say, you know, I've almost got a PhD in this. I've been studying this. I've lived this life for 32 years. I've been studying this for 12 years. I don't know everything the government has done to our people. And so there's sort of this idea that it's like, it's in the past, it's over. And so the hard part for us is, you know, well, it's really easy to go, okay, well, Trump and all that, that's easy to say. We have someone like Trudeau, we call the selfie prime minister, who has like a Thunderbird tattooed on him, right? And yet right now the biggest thing they're saying is, oh, we're gonna get internet to rural communities, but they can't get clean water. We still have 66 communities with long-term, we're talking like decades of not having clean water. And so they tend to do things in this way. And then we have like right now the biggest issue, and of course this is facing all of our globally, we're facing a pandemic, but today I just read there's a Cree Nation in northern Manitoba, all 28 elders in the care home and 14 staff have COVID right now. And if you think in a community, small communities, 28 elders, I'm getting the goosebumps. So when I think about it, I just think I believe in recognition in some ways, but I really believe this conversation about reconciliation, many of my elders say it was at one point truth and reconciliation, and everybody seems to have forgotten the truth part. And so I think that's the space where we still have Canadian senators saying residential schools didn't happen, right? So as on one hand, I think we're doing, when I look at the scale of where we are, and I look at America and I look at my family, what they're dealing with in the States versus here, right? I'm from a nation where the border, we cross the border. So when I look at that, I can say, okay, yeah, things are better and I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to have an Indigenous studies position, you know, when I look at those kind of things. But there's always, I just feel we are not where we'd like to be when it comes to that kind of health, and especially in the wake of COVID. So thanks.
Thank you, Smokey. Jamie, do you want to go next as we kind of pivot to the other side of the world?
It's the same here for Aboriginal people in Australia. You know, we struggle a lot with land rights, and especially with the Black Lives Matter movement. Last year, a young man got killed at my home community. He was 17 years of age, and we're in the middle of that battle right now. So the political health in Australia isn't very good. And, you know, we have a lot of talk from the government, and there's a lot of policies, including closing the gap, which was aimed to close the gap between Indigenous health and life expectancy versus non-Indigenous health and life expectancy. And closing the gap has only reached, you know, they've only achieved one goal out of 9 that they've aimed to achieve. So yeah, it's still, you know, racism is a battle that all Indigenous people face, and it's really big here in Australia. So yeah, I agree with everyone else with what they've been saying, and yeah, just got to keep fighting, I guess. And you know, it's good that we've got a lot of young Aboriginal people coming up and that are really knowledgeable on this, and we're all really taking a stand. So, and I was just wanted to answer also the last bit about, is there agreement or disagreement in your community? And I'm sure we can all agree that there's always agreements and disagreements within communities. But the way we really approach that in Australia, or Aboriginal Australia, is really, letting our elders sit down and talk it out, and then us following the lead of the elders. And in a lot of cases here in Australia, Aboriginal people have, traditional ceremonies where we actually sort out these differences and sort out these agreements and disagreements. And that's worked for thousands of years, and we still practice that till today.
Thank you, Jamie. And then we'll end this question with Kirak.
Maybe I'll cut to the chase. So for me personally, one of the biggest issues facing our communities here is there's sort of been a division between those that have and those that don't. And I don't just mean in terms of access to culture, I mean in terms of access to services and provisions and opportunities. So we've been quite successful, I guess, through the Waitangi Tribunal process, which is a sort of like a reconciliations process set up to recognise that the treaty signed in 1840 between the British and Maori was largely ignored right up until the 1970s. So in the mid-1970s, legislation was set up to have a commission of inquiry into grievances which largely were based around the return of land. So we haven't had a lot of land returned. We've had in the vicinity of 1 or 2% of that which was confiscated and taken by various other means. But what it has enabled is a transfer of some wealth into tribes, not a lot of money, but a couple of the bigger tribes have been able to turn $170 million in the mid-1990s into a nearly $1 billion, effectively, corporation. Some of the bigger tribes too, that I'm thinking in particular. But it's what the result of that is that these have become large corporations in effect, and they the people working for the corporations, the people who are parts of those tribes and members of those tribes do have access to types of support. But then we have other tribes which are not wealthy. And then in addition to that, we have members of people who are euphemistically referred to as disconnected. Now, those are people that don't have active involvement in tribal affairs. And that's a growing proportion of our population. And that group of people, to me, is the biggest challenge, not in a challenge in the sense that they're a problem, but rather that the success of some of the tribes in reconstituting themselves, they've been unable to support large swathes of our population. Now, this group of people are, some of them are tied up with gangs, some of them are intergenerationally unemployed, drugs, and a whole bunch doing really awesome stuff for different communities. I was, about a month ago, I was talking with gang leaders in the North Island, and they're trying to develop programs for their members of their gangs, not to get out of the gang, but to get into work and do different types of programs. And the tribes, the wealthy tribes, wouldn't help them, and nor would the government. So there's a big chunk of our population who are not getting any sort of support, and the gangs are largely having to drive this themselves. So don't know if that answers all parts of your question, but it's a mixed bag, I guess I would respond. So we have some successes, and we've got a long way to go in many other ways.
Next question we'll go to is, do you and other members of your community face misconceptions about how Native and Indigenous people should look and act? How does that affect you and in your community? And we'll go ahead and start this one off with Shaquana.
So we definitely face misconceptions. I grew up on the reservation, but we went to school at Ledyard, and it's predominantly like white. So um, just even like being in, like, if I got close with like people, not close, but like if I were to like talk to other people, like I would always get questions like, well, like you aren't native, like you just look black, like, or like, so I'm like no. Like, so that's a lot of, like, that's what I've run into that a lot, like even like within the tribe, like they'll be like, you don't look like this, or like you don't fit this. So it's like you're kind of facing from like both sides of like pretty much your life, like, oh, like I'm like I look too much of this and I look too less of this. And it happens, and then that leads to a lot of kids like not even wanting to be involved in their tribe or like their culture, or because they lose that sense of pride, and they just want to fit in with everyone else. But growing up, I always loved where I was from. I like, even though people would say all that to me, like I was always very excited to um, just be in the community and do all that I could possibly do. But it definitely, it's a big problem, I would say, in definitely a lot of communities on the East as well, because we look like we have color. So I'm Black and I'm Native. So, they're like, oh, you can't be both. Like, no, I can be both. And I do it well. I grew up on my reservation since I was born. And this is like all I know. So it's just like, you just have to take pride in it. But it's definitely a big issue, and we always try to push like that we are all one, like we are diversified, like if you know your history, and then you would know why stuff is like that. But then it's still a new day and age, so there's all types of um, people who have all different backgrounds in life. So um, it's just, I think it's up to people in your community to um, remind people in the tribe that you are still a part, and like we are all one, and that we should all just work together for the better.
Thank you, Shaquana. I know it's a big issue we have with people that come to NACP here at UConn, is they think that they can't get involved because they don't look a certain way, and that's of course not true. Smokey, do you want to take this next?
Sure, yeah. I think you'll notice I'm decked out. So part of that is I follow one of my Nasukins, my chief, who says he wears a medallion every time he does something like this. And whenever he gets asked about it, he says, well, I wasn't allowed to. We were legally not allowed to wear our regalia. We were not allowed to gather for like almost 100 years. Potlatch bans, they call them. Like more than 2 Indians was a war party kind of thing. And so just to tell you like one story, and I'll try and make this quick. My grandmother went to residential school here, and every year my great granny was a renowned beader, so everybody knew her beadwork. And so every year, Granny would make my grandma, as a little girl, a buckskin dress with beadwork, and she would wear it to school. She would have to wear it and get on that bus and go to school. And every year she would get there, and it would get taken away, and she'd get put in a uniform. And when she got it back, it wouldn't fit anymore. And so she was always so devastated she didn't get to wear this thing that she wanted to wear. And then my mom came along, and it was she always said it was before AIM, it was before it was cool. And my mom, this is one generation after residential school, right? And my mom one time had this pair of jeans, and she was a teenager, and she said, oh, Granny, can you sew these for me? And Granny put beadwork on her jeans. And my mom was so ashamed and horrified that she folded up those jeans and put them in a closet and just hid them. Even though like they were 2-bedroom trailer with 13 kids. Like, I mean, not wearing her jeans was a thing, but she didn't want anything to do with it, right? So to me, wearing this stuff is reclaiming. And so that's something that I do. That's something that I do when I come forward. But I just want to make one little weird note about that. Interestingly enough, this is something I learned with transitioning. So testosterone actually made me darker. And so I don't get asked who I am anymore. And I don't get told I don't look Native anymore. But I used to before. And so it's really weird. I also don't know if that was like presenting as a woman and just the way that people comment on women's appearance more than they do to men. And so I just wanted to mention that because I think gender stuff is weird. And it's something that I noticed. And since I've lived on sort of in many different ways and been seen many different ways, I think it's an interesting one to share that I don't really get that comment anymore, but I do think women do all the time. So want to pass that one on.
Thank you, Smokey, and thank you for sharing those really personal stories with this question. Jamie, do you want to take it next?
Yeah, so where I'm from in Alice Springs, Aboriginal people face huge misconceptions. And they're not really good ones. They're, you know, very stereotypical ones of Aboriginal people, you know, being, you know, nearly not human still. And this affects us massively. And it affects, you know, the opportunities that we get given, especially in terms of education and work and even housing. You know, if it wasn't for me, you know, being my own man and moving away and you know, going to get a better education, I would have really struggled because we face so much misconceptions of, you know, why are you at school? Why are you here? You know, you should be, you know, out bush, living the traditional life. And it's really hard and it affects us, you know, mentally. And it makes us, you know, it tears us down really. And I think another huge impact this has is on social media. And you know, hearing racist comments and seeing racist comments on social media and, you know, things like that really affects us. And, you know, it's really divided the town that I come from. So, you know, because I'm Aboriginal, I'm not really allowed to have friends that aren't Aboriginal. I'm not allowed to have, you know, I have family members that aren't Aboriginal, but when I'm seen with them, sort of like, well, why are you with them? So it's really divided, yeah, my town, and it does really affect us, and yeah, it tears us down, which yeah, is still a work in progress, and it is slowly getting better. You know, I think sports is a big key to bringing people together and changing those misconceptions, and just sitting down and getting to, you know, talk and know one another.
Garrick, would you like to go next?
Sure. So yeah, we have those types of misconceptions about who was part of Indigenous group and who wasn't, based on whether your skin color is fair, but also language is also another marker of identity. And it's become bigger and bigger within Māori communities, which has created a bit of a problem. So I was going to say before, land and language is what we've had some success at in terms of recovering some land, but also our language revitalization. But it's become a bit of a problem at the same time, in the sense that if you don't speak the language, you sort of get sidelined a little bit. But there's lots of really good pushback against that within our communities now, and we acknowledge that the history of colonialism and talk about it much more has created a situation where some of our people just don't have access to language, and that's quite all right. But we just create as many opportunities as we can for people to engage at the point in which they might like to. So, yeah.
Thank you, Garrick. And then we'll end this question with Asusena.
So just thinking about, I like to provide a little bit of history always. So the colonial Peruvian state, throughout its inception, I think it has tried to kill the Indian, save the man. So after the War of the Pacific in 1883, there was a Peruvian intellectual by the name of Belaunde that proposed mestizaje, which means like mixture. So it's the approximation to whiteness as a way to unify the nation. And he basically reduced indigenous people, stating that by having an indigenous body or being, you could be physically indigenous, have the phenotypical features, but you can possess a Western spirit, therefore you are mestizo. And that was proposed in order to be united, civilized, westernized. And I think that due to this, many indigenous peoples in Peru and in the diaspora as well, come to believe that just because they do not speak their indigenous language and no longer reside on their ancestral lands, that they're considered mestizos, not racially, but socially. So there's this socialization of whiteness through education, through language, mastering Spanish, for example. However, many Peruvians practice indigenous customs, and we use a lot of Quechuanismos, which is Quechua words that are found in Spanish. And a lot of people say, you know, in the context of Latin America, they say, oh, that's Peruvian Spanish or that's Colombian Spanish, when in fact, those are actually indigenous languages. I love tacos, so I went to pick up tacos, and I was asking the owner there that what was this item, and he was like, it's elote. I didn't know what elote meant, but that's actually an indigenous language. It means corn. And he said, oh, you guys call it choclo. Choclo is a Quechua language. So we were interchanging indigenous languages, you know, framing it as a different type of Spanish, but that's an example of how we survive, how our languages have survived, even incorporating the assimilation of Spanish, and I would say the having to speak Spanish or having be able to speak and express yourself in Spanish, have this Westernized thinking. So I believe that there's a lot of shame surrounding indigeneity in Peru and in the Peruvian diaspora as well. Though our indigenous language is recognized as an official language, there's still a lot of repression of its usage. And there was a census in 2017 where Peruvians self-identify. There was 20% of them that self-identify as indigenous, 60 as mestizos. Now, put in quotation marks because, again, there's this push to be mestizo. And many Indian migrants that migrated from the Andes to Lima, such as my grandparents, my grandparents did not repress, thank God, their indigeneity, but they are people that have repressed their indigeneity, especially because of the continued discrimination against our phenotypical features, our cosmovision, our Indian cosmovision, our languages, our customs. However, there is an embrace of indigeneity when it comes to tourism, because that brings in money. That's when we embrace indigeneity. That's when people want to. It's almost like a love and hate, right? I don't like myself not in the presence of the tourist, but when the tourist is present, that's when I show my indigeneity. So it's this weird dichotomy that we have, I think, and it's unfortunate that more people do not speak Quechua, but I'm, you know, as being a first generation, not being able to speak Quechua or not learning, growing up with it, I do want to reclaim that, especially when I have an aunt who I recently met who doesn't speak Spanish. She only speaks Quechua. And when I went to my ancestral lands, there are indigenous elders that you're not even considered or looked at if you don't know how to speak your indigenous language. So there's also that, you know, when you're trying to connect, and then there's elders that say, you know, stay right there, foreigner, because I was called foreigner in my own ancestral lands. And hearing that is very hurtful, because I'm trying to reclaim, I'm trying to be, I'm trying to be as open as I can be. And then when I see other indigenous youth come back from Lima to our ancestral lands, and I see them interacting with the elders, I'm so envious, because I didn't have that opportunity to remain in Lima and be so connected and be so close to my ancestral lands, even though it is very difficult to get there. You get there, you know, you have to take a plane, and then you have to basically do a 3-hour bus ride, and you go around and around mountains, and it's so far away. But at the same time, I was happy to be there. And yeah, there's this repression of indigeneity. And I feel like we find that not just in those communities or the migrant communities within Peru, but also in the diaspora.
Thank you, Azucena. So because we are getting short on time, I'm going to kind of combine the last two questions a little bit. So how do you understand what reparations looks like for your community? And then how do you see that playing into Indigenous internationalism and kind of finding solidarity in an international Indigenous community? We'll start this one with Smokey.
Thank you. How I understand reparations, I'm looking to my youth who have the hashtag land back going all over the place. I recently saw someone have it tattooed on their knuckles, land back. But I'm really looking to the youth who say reconciliation is dead and give us our land back. And when we look at the land mass of Canada, the reserves are 0.2% of the land mass of Canada. So we, all of our land, all of our territory, out of all of that, we only have 0.2% left, right? And so there's a lot of crown land. There's a lot of land that, like right now in my nation, one of the mining companies manages land. And so we don't have a treaty. So now we're negotiating with them because they know if we did decide to take them to court, we could win. So now we're getting chances where that reconciliation is happening, and perhaps we can find ways to get on that land, to get that stuff working. But I think that's deeply important. I talk about how I have to rent from a nice white couple, or they're very lovely, but I have to rent on my own territory, and there's no way I'll ever have a home on my reserve because my grandmother lost her status because she married a white man. So I can't gain access to those rights on reserve. So those kind of things. And I guess with global solidarity, like I have to listen to my elders and my leaders. And while I 100% love to sit here and listen to all of you, I'm told I'm Tunaka first and that I need to pay attention to what's happening here. I've even been told, no, don't go out there to the West Coast. Don't go out there to the East Coast because we're going to need you to be ready when we have to set up our own blockades. So you can support them, but don't go out there, because we need you here to be ready. So that's what I've been told. And so when I look at that global, I think it's important. I'm grateful for those connections. I'm grateful that COVID has made Zoom normal so we can do stuff like this. But in general, I'm told that it's like what matters to me is what it is in Amakas Tunaka, what we've been here 14,000 years. So it's about what I have to do here in my role here. So thank you.
Thank you, Smokey. Jamie, you want to take it next?
Yeah, so for me, reparations, at the moment, we're really working hard on getting back. This is Walbury, so where I come from. We're working hard on getting back our ancestral remains and, sacred objects that have been taken away from us. And this is huge and a key factor in us healing and coming together. Because a lot of this stuff has been taken away, and when people pass away, we have certain ceremonies to, heal and to end that mourning. But we haven't had the opportunity to do this with our ancestral remains and ancestors getting taken away. So this is a key part to us healing and moving forward, and global solidarity. I think it's really important, and I think this is a example of it, all of us coming together and sharing ideas and learning off one another, and yeah.
Thank you, Jamie. Garrick, do you want to go next?
Sure. So in terms of reparations, so I'm actually working on a paper around reparations internationally, but focusing on the Aotearoa New Zealand context next year. But the reparations work that has been done here over the last 30 plus years, through the Waitangi Tribunal, which is a commission of inquiry, and when it comes to the actual settlements, has been largely driven by economic rationalism, which is to say, whatever the country can afford at that moment, that's what they'll return, either in land or cash and some other symbolic gestures. And there are minuscule proportions of what was confiscated from Māori being returned. And Māori tribes have been largely pragmatic in response to the government's offers to say, well, we get that there are limitations to what the government can spend, and we'll accept this for now and try to build. I think that sort of focusing on what the government can afford and what it has access to in the moment sort of really misses the point about reparations. And reparations, we have a old concept called utu, which is the concept of achieving balance when there's been some type of transgression in the relationship. We have a process which we go through to achieve balance, and we call this utu. And I'm arguing for a process which is focused on utu, restoring balance in the relationship between Pākehā, which is what we call white people, and Māori. And a part of that, which is a strong part of my argument in that piece of work, is the idea that in order for balance to be restored, Pākehā have to experience pain, right? It's not just the transfer of resources, they actually have to experience pain. And I don't mean this in some type of sadistic way. That the pain in which we experience through the process of colonization, that's in effect what they have to experience to bring balance and restoration to the relationship. And the pain that I'm talking about here is the ability not to control outcomes and giving up things that they no longer have control over. I don't mean necessarily physical pain on individuals, but rather giving up control in terms of sharing of power, not being able to determine particular outcomes, how we might use what's been returned in reparations. They just have to give up control of that. And part of experiencing pain is to bring balance to the relationship. But the second part is that so they know what we've been through and they won't do it again. So for me, reparations should be about some meeting out of pain, but not in some sadistic type of way. Although, yeah. Kia ora.
Thank you, Garrick. We'll go to Asusena next.
Okay, so I had a hard time with this question. There was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission enacted after the internal civil war in Peru. So this was like the 80s and the 90s. And the commission found that the Indian people were used by this insurgent group who were mainly headed by the middle-class mestizo leaders, but not just the insurgent group, paramilitary and the military also to attain their means of control. So there were 69,000 indigenous peoples that were murdered and missing, disappeared. Many of them were Quechua speakers. So there were recommendations by this commission, which was upholding the rule of law, like reparations for victims. However, the Peruvian elite does not want to honor these recommendations. And right now in Peru, we're protesting our right to restore democracy. So we're demanding that there be constitutional amendments from the dictatorship of Fujimori back in 1993. So we're hoping that these amendments, these changes will incorporate our indigenous sovereignty and our indigenous cosmovision and our way of life. Yeah, so it's a long process. I think right now I'm sighing deeply because I've had family members on all three sides, insurgent group, paramilitary, and the military. And to know that these reparations are very slow, no strides have been made, unfortunately. So we're hoping that this new youth, our indigenous youth as well, bring forth these changes.
Thank you, Asusena, and then we'll end off on Shaquana, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A. So if you have any questions, if you want to message me or Kaylee or post them in the chat or just speak them out loud, we'll do that after Shaquana answers.
So I definitely agree with the youth pretty much spearheading like a new movement. I think it's hard to get even like the American government like to even acknowledge that this wasn't their land, or that like this was Native Americans' land. And I think all that it would take for reparations would definitely be a lot. But I think if everyone were to come together, like all the indigenous in America to come together and change what's going on, then this is a hard question. But yeah, so I think it takes unity to want change. Like if you want to change something, then you need to know what's going on with your neighbor, like your sister tribes, and everyone get together and start a movement. And yeah, I have nothing else to say, but that's definitely a hard one. And for Indigenous internationalism, I think it would be awesome to connect and like create a bond with every indigenous like tribe, or like create and start a new type of movement, and to get us like all communicating, because this is like awesome, just even being on the panel with like you guys from Australia, New Zealand. So I think just being a force to like reckon with, and like just going for whatever we think that we should get and deserve. That's all I have to say. If I answered, I tried.
No, you answered great. You know, it's
Okay.
hundreds and hundreds of years of horrible things that colonial bodies have done, and it doesn't have an easy answer. But I know, sitting here on this panel and listening to everyone's different perspectives, especially since most of the places indigenous communities colonized here were Commonwealth colonization, so there's a lot of similar practices. So we'll open it up to the Q&A. Has anyone written in the chat? I'm on my iPad, so it's a little bit off to the side. I don't know, Keely, have you got anything?
Yes, I have several questions. Susanna, you did send me a chat that you missed something that you wanted to say. Did you want to follow up?
Yes, I did not answer all of the questions, but I did want to say that there is an Inca prophecy, the eagle and the condor. I don't know if you guys have heard about it, but it's the indigenous peoples from the north being the eagle, and then indigenous peoples from the south in the Western hemisphere coming together and working together. And this is the year, this is it. This is our generation. This is the Pachacuti moment. So I wanted to talk about that. And there's very many instances of that. Having this panel right now, it's a form of resistance. This right here is an example of that time. And I think there's so many prophecies, not just in the Western hemisphere, but there's other prophecies globally too that talk about this. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Susanna. So we do have quite a few questions, but I think we are scheduled to end in 15 minutes. So we'll just kind of like see how far we get. And if we don't get to everyone's questions, I'm really sorry. But anyway, so the first question is from Nora. How do you try to inspire those whose identities are examples of intersectionality within Indigenous culture, and including like Black culture, Indigenous culture, being LGBTQ, Two-Spirit plus, and how can we sort of help these youth who are watching us, their elders, etc., to embrace those intersectional identities?
And this is also open to anyone, so I'm not gonna like call on anybody. If you want to answer, you can go ahead and hop on and stack on what people say.
I feel like often I make the joke that when you look up intersectional identity, you see me in the dictionary. So I will just speak to one of the things that we say, like our existence is resistance. So I did not know a Two-Spirit person until I was, 27 years old, 20 or maybe 20, maybe 26. But and now I am, in my hometown. I'm on my reserve. I recently just got hired with a contract with our social sector to, because they have parents, they have families with Two-Spirit kids that don't know what to do. And so now I get to go one-on-one, and I kind of get to be representation for that. And so to me, that's like just living in that way. And then also really like asking those questions, right? So one of the things that one of my friends who is Black and Anishinaabe, Shanice Steele, was like, what does your nation do for Black History Month? And I was like, whoa, there's a question I've never asked. And so that made me want to go and actually ask those questions and ask about, you know, often in our languages, we have these sort of like, here's the word for Black people. And I'm like, well, like, where did that word come from? Or is that word even acceptable right now? Or those kinds of questions. And so really saying like, because I think the Black erasure, especially in a rural small town community here, is like easy to do. And so when I look at those, just really those same questions we have to ask everywhere: who is not at the table and why not, right?
So I might respond to this in terms of, it's really about proximity and putting visibility around different people. So I'll explain it this way. In the Māori communities, death is the biggest, most important event of all, the funeral, or we call it tangihanga. But there's a really important moment in the gathering, in that you have the male elders alongside of the female elders, and the female elders are often known as the puno roimata, which is the wellspring of tears, and the men would do oratory. And what you have are two images. You have the queer, the elderly woman who would be in grief, and the men who would give speeches, but were really quite stoic. And what that for me says is, you know, grief doesn't have to be expressed in any particular way. There are different models in which we can embrace, and just having different models around us allow us to navigate our own pathway through that. So it's really, my response to that is really about proximity and having different models and exemplars around young folk.
So in the Quechua cosmology, there is what Western culture would consider a third sex. So it's the Gariwarmi, which is, we honor this jaguar deity that is, it was mainly, I believe it was, and how it manifested itself physically was that there were shamans mainly that looked physically masculine, but were enabled to be feminine. And there were shamans, they were honored, right? And they were revered. And they were able to negotiate between the masculine and the feminine, the present and the past and the present and the future. And they had these special connections with the divine. And kind of revitalizing, right, your indigeneity. I think it's part of that, having this resistance, and just going back to the knowledge that's present there. Unfortunately, due to assimilation and colonization, a lot of our indigenous communities are not honoring the third sex, the Gariwarmi. And I have first cousins that are Black and Indigenous, and it's wonderful because we were able to connect in so many ways. And we share our grandmother who's Indigenous, and their grandparents that are African. And, we used to have these family gatherings, and it was great. And when she go to visit her family, and I remember this as a kid, I was so excited to have her over because she would teach me what she learned about her family and the culture and the customs that were passed on. But even in the mainstream Peruvian culture, this is also venerated. Our Black Afro-Peruvians are venerated as well. And but it's not, of course, there's anti-Blackness as well. So I need to be honest about that. There's absolutely anti-Blackness, and there's anti-indigeneity that work hand in hand together. But yeah, I think it's going back to your ancestral knowledge and tapping into that and recognizing that these intersectionalities are all part of being us, and we see this in nature. And as Indigenous people, we're an extension of everything around us. You know, everything around us, natural, our brothers and sisters. I just want.
Okay. I have another question. The next one comes from Lily. Oh yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was unmuted. Sorry. So how do you and your community understand sovereignty? Perhaps how does it work differently than colonial nation states? How does your community understand it differently?
In our community, there's a joke too. So they like to call it like sovereign tree. And so they usually have like a tree and stuff, like, and make a joke because someone like said it wrong. So I wanted to say that. But also we see it as like a nation within a nation. So like we, like, you know, we govern ourselves. So like, for example, like for COVID, like when they were shutting stuff down and like going into like phase 1 for Connecticut, like we had the choice, like we decide on our own, like if we were going to shut the casino down or if we we're going to keep it open. Like that's our thing. They can shut down stuff in Connecticut and throughout there, but what's on our land is what we control and like what we maintain and what we run. So basically, we know that we are a nation within a nation, and that's our government, which is our tribal council, is our government, and they're the one who lead us and get everything that we need. So we're a nation within a nation, so go sovereignty, even though it's not the best in America, but we do what we can.
Perhaps I'll go ahead. Sovereignty, right? So within the treaty that was signed between us and the British, sovereignty was written in the English text. In the Maori text, it wasn't sovereignty at all, and the whole concept of sovereignty is quite foreign culturally to our context. And we talk about, in the treaty itself, was a concept of tino rangatiratanga, which is the sort of chieftainship. But even that itself is quite a new idea. So mana is the concept, which is really about the ultimate authority, which is born, handed down to people, and so it's from both divine and worlds and human worlds. So we talk about mana as the most important thing. And following on from that, particularly what's taken hold within our communities is the notion of mana mutsuhake, which is the idea that we have this authority which is quite separate from the state. And a lot of the nation state, a lot of the actions being taken by tribes is to work towards that gradually. And I was going to say, and this connects to the point, we often say that the land was taken from us, but the land's still there, right? And so the part of enacting our mana mutsuhake, or our sovereignty or authority, is to actually just go out and be on the land. The land is still there, and it will be there in 1,000 years. And it's building that relationship with the land. And so sometimes there are misconceptions within our own language. So.
Okay, we have another one in the chat, and it says, how do you feel about casinos being understood by the broader public as the ultimate form of reparation? Because I think a lot of people in the US see reparations for tribes and nations to just be casinos.
Yeah, this goes down to something that's happening in Canada right now with lobster fishing on the Atlantic coast. So these ideas of sovereignty, these ideas of sort of special rights, right? This idea that if Indigenous people are allowed to lobster fish off season, you know, with a tiny amount of licenses, then they are doing something special, just like casinos, right? Something special, right? Or taxes, these kind of ideas. And it's just misconceptions, deep misconceptions that allow for hatred and racism, right? But I just wanted to share that, like, our old residential school is a casino resort. And often people hear that and go, oh God, right? But as I know it, my elders who survived that school, who are former students of that school, they spearheaded that space, and they decided that that's what they wanted to do there, to help bring in revenue, to help with, like, to have a space as well where we could hold our own conferences, our own language gatherings, our own, those things. So it's very, very complex when it comes to these sort of questions. And I think our like, you know, it's easy to say, okay, the casino is the bad thing or this or that, but there's so many different questions about that. Yeah. Actually, just on that note, I just want to quote Daniel Heath Justice, who is a wonderful Cherokee writer and incredible human being. He says, you know, we have to hold the complexities. And I think in general, the sort of dominant settler culture doesn't know how to do that with themselves or with us. So.
Okay, thank you, Smokey. And then for the Q&A, we'll end with this last question, which is, do you feel close to other Indigenous people in your community, even though they might be from other nations or communities?
In Australia, we have really close connections with, you know, native neighboring tribes and whatnot. We sort of come together, and, you know, we do ceremonies together, we have meetings, and this creates a really close connection. And at the end of the day, we're all connected through our culture, which is song lines and, you know, kinship systems. And this makes a really good platform for us to stand together, which we do. And yeah, so I think, yeah, in Australia, we have really, really close connections with neighboring tribes, and yeah, for sure.
I'll answer. So for the East Coast, we like to call each other like sister tribes. So Shinnecock in New York, Narragansett, Rhode Island, Eastern Pequot, Mohegan, and also Mashpee, Wampanoag. We're all very close, I would say, from my own opinion, just because, like, I have really great relationships with so many people from each of those tribes. And we also, like, grew up together, just going to their powwows, doing whatever, like, with the youth councils, it's really big on this side. So with the youth councils, there's just a lot of connecting that we do, and we've become, like, very close. Like, I've even seen, like, people that I've grown up with get on council, like, for their tribe, and, like, do amazing things. So I would say the relationship is definitely good. It could be better when it comes to connecting and you know, pushing towards stuff as a whole, which we're definitely working on as a lot of the youth get into positions and older and other roles, and just gaining more knowledge as we go. So creating, like, great bonds. I love my Eastern Woodland tribes.
So I'll just quickly add in my little 5 cents. So I try to reach and make connections wherever I go, actually, with Indigenous folk and people of colour, anywhere I go. But one of the things that's happening in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is in the past, the Polynesian community, who are from the South Pacific, generally have been identified as Indigenous, largely because they've been able to maintain control over their countries and islands, and haven't had to claim indigeneity. But within New Zealand, what we've had is the Polynesian diasporic community claiming indigeneity in such a way that builds bridges between Māori, who are Polynesian, and the broader Polynesian community. But it raises a really interesting point, and this is done by the works of a Tongan writer called Apeli Hauofa, who wrote Our Sea of Islands. And what he said was that our nation is not bound by particular borders, nation states. The thing that connects us is not land, but it's water. And the water is what connects the Polynesian peoples. And so what he's trying to implore us to do is to make broader connections within our relationships throughout the South Pacific and conceive of ourselves not just bound to particular land, but being joined by water.
All right, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you everyone for speaking. Thank you for everyone who came. Thank you to our co-sponsors, and also thank you, a quick little shout out to my professors, Francois Doussat and Jane Gordon, who's my faculty advisor, and then Kaylee, who's our graduate assistant, because they all connected, brought together 3 of our panelists today that we definitely wouldn't be able to hear them speak without them. So thank you to them too.